right, let's talk about job evaluation and some alternative pay structures. So, job evaluation. We've got to consider, obviously, those market forces that we've talked about. We have to consider principles of fairness. And then somehow we have to figure out what's the relative contribution each job makes to the organization's performance. So remember I said that in that we're going to figure out how do we assess in a job structure what's the value of an administrative assistant relative to an engineer, relative to an accountant. So how do we get this relative view of jobs in our organizational structure? One tool that we can use to do that is something called job evaluation, which is just a process, they call it an administrative procedure, for looking at the relative value, the relative worth of the different jobs. So the way that we would do this is first we have a list of criteria, things that we're going to compare our jobs on. These are called, in job evaluation term, they're called compensable factors. So compensable factors are just things that we are willing to pay for. And the things we are willing to pay for in this example on this slide, we're willing to pay for experience, we're willing to pay for education, and we're willing to pay for the level of complexity that you are going to encounter in doing your job. Some jobs are a lot more complex than others. And this is one simple example. Different job evaluations use different compensable factors, and sometimes they have many more than just these three. You could have things like problem solving in your job and various things. But for this example, let's just imagine that these are our three important compensable factors: experience, education, and complexity. And then we're going to compare our jobs. We're just going to give them scores. In this case, it looks like they're giving scores, I think, on between 1 and 100 on each one of those compensable factors. So the three jobs that they're comparing are a computer operator, a computer programmer, and a system analyst. And for each of those, they say, what's the level of experience you need just to get this job? And they give them a score. It's a 40 for both programmer and operator, and you need a 65 to be a system analyst in our company. What about education? You can see that there's a slightly increasing level of education you're going to need for each one of those jobs. And each of those jobs is a little bit more complex going down. So computer operator is the least complex, followed by programmer, followed by system analyst. And we are using computer jobs for this example, but if our company had an administrative person, if our company had an accountant, we could plug those into the same table and look at them in terms of experience, education, and complexity of those jobs. And then when all of that is done, you add up and you have a job evaluation score. And that job evaluation score is how we can then rank and compare and create this structure of jobs, saying the system analyst is a job that needs to be paid more than a computer operator because it has more points. So that's what job evaluation is all about, just giving us a very objective way of assessing the different jobs and what they're worth compared to the other jobs in our organization. So remember what we started with in the beginning, that after we do all this stuff, so we've learned everything we know about the market, we have unique goals for as our organization, our strategy. We figure out this relative contribution each job is making. We know what is being paid out there in the big world, and that's how we create our pay structure. And our goal is that our employees are going to feel like it's equitable, which means it's fair, and it's motivating. We want people to feel like, I'm going to show up here every day and do this work because I am being paid fairly and at a level that feels right to me. So once we've created the pay structure, there are a few additional terms you need to know and understand for a compensation program. So one is pay grades. Most of you have probably heard pay grade when people say things like, that's above my pay grade. So a pay grade is where they group all the jobs that have similar worth. So going back to our this example before, you might have system analyst in the same worth pay grade as a director of HR and a manager of accounting, and I'm just guessing, but let's just imagine we've done job evaluation for all of our jobs. The pay grade is not, just computer jobs. It's jobs that have a similar worth. It's jobs that, skipped ahead. Similar worth or content, and they're grouped together. So managerial jobs tend to be in one pay grade. Executive level jobs are a different pay grade. Pay ranges are what the amount you would pay within that pay grade. So anyone within a manager role is going to make from this amount to this amount. There's a minimum, there's a maximum, and there's a midpoint. And we look at that for each pay grade. That's the pay range. And that's why I used the example earlier where I'm hiring someone for my bicycle company. It's a job, and someone says, well, what's your range for that job? That's an acceptable question to ask when you're interviewing for a job and you want to know where you're going to be placed within the pay range. Some companies will answer that, some companies don't, but it's very acceptable to ask just so you know where you fall. And paid differentials goes back to the concept in the last video when I said, if you ask someone to do something that is harder or in worse conditions, they expect to be paid. That pay is called a paid differential. It's an adjustment that you make to account for working conditions or even labor markets. So working conditions might be that night shift. You're doing the exact same job as someone who works the day shift, but the conditions are harder, so you get a differential to work the night shift. You get some sort of extra money to do this less pleasant job. You also might get a pay differential if my company is headquartered in Louisiana and you work for me in Louisiana and you have a certain pay, and I ask you to go live and work in my California location where the cost of living is considerably higher. I would say, so you have your pay and I'm going to give you this pay differential to help make it up for you moving to a different location. So those are the terms: pay grades, pay ranges, pay differentials. Here's a couple of alternative pay structures that we might see out there in the world of work. One is called broadbands, where instead of having an org structure with a whole lot of layers, you reduce it without having a whole lot of pay grades that we just talked about. We have fewer, bigger bands, fewer layers of management, just a big band of everybody that's in management to executive levels, or one big band, everyone who's in, individual contributor roles of any kind would be in one big band. We wouldn't be differentiating between that. Computer programmer would be in one pay grade, and then a system analyst would be in the next pay grade. They'd all be in one broad band in this alternative pay structure. And another alternative pay structure you might see would be skill-based pay, which is paying people based on the level of skills or knowledge. So broad bands, as I just described, we combine a bunch of different pay grades into one big broad band. And by doing this, organizations give managers more flexibility in making assignments and giving pay increases because you're still within the band. So whereas in a pay range, remember, that was based on a pay grade, and you only had that, this certain range. But if we made it bigger, there's a bigger range and I have more flexibility because I'm not going outside of my broadband to pay people. The downside of broadbands is that people like to feel like they're being promoted. They like to have that feeling of, I was in this pay grade, and when I was computer operator, but now I'm a system analyst and I moved up in my pay grade. I am now a different level, and broadbands take some of that away because you just kind of stay in the same band, you just get little tweaks to your pay. So when we eliminate layers in job descriptions and layers in our hierarchy, you have to come up with new ways to reward your employees, because employees like those, I was a analyst, now I'm a manager, now I'm a director, now I'm a vice president, and in broadbands a lot of that has gone away. So we've got to come up with some other way to make people feel valued and rewarded and as if they're making progress. In skill-based pay, we set pay according to employees' level of skill or knowledge, or what they are capable of doing. So they can assemble the bicycle, they can design new bicycles, whatever. We have these skills or abilities that we are going to pay for. And it makes sense at an organization where technology changes all the time, and we want to encourage our employees to continually go out there and learn the new technology, learn the new innovations that are happening, and we'll pay you to keep up to date. You have this skill now, so you get additional pay for that. It allows us to empower our employees, enrich their jobs, because they're out there increasing their knowledge and ability to make good decisions all the time. That in skill-based pay areas. The disadvantage of skill-based pay is that we're basically saying if you get these skills, we will pay you more, and it isn't always tied to whether they need those skills and whether we're going to get a value of those skills in our organization. So we're paying them to learn things, and we're not always guaranteed that what they're learning is going to impact their job performance in our organization. Even if, they'll pay me if I went and got my master's degree, and maybe then I don't need that master's degree to continue assembling bicycles, for example. So a couple last thoughts or things I want to leave you with on pay and pay structures. As I mentioned earlier when we talked about the laws, one thing that continues to be in the news is executive pay. The media talks about executive pay. It comes up when there are scandals in organizations. It comes up when there are labor disputes. We hear about just what the executives make. And the reason why this attracts our attention is just because top executives in U.S. companies make a lot of money. And there's been lots of discussion about it, especially since, like I said, the Great Recession in 2009. This is just an issue, and it's an issue as we are talking about pay and pay structures. It's just something to be aware of. It's just how much executives make and how much they make relative to other employees in the organization. Once we have done all this work, we have established our pay structure, we figured out the market, we figured out our pay grades, we figured out the pay structure, we have to continue to monitor that the pay practices are actually in line with what we've created. Because what happens in organizations, we create this beautiful pay structure, we give people pay ranges, and then they go out and say, look, I can't hire an engineer within this pay grade. I can't get the type of engineer I need. I need somebody who has more experience, and if I'm going to hire them away from their current job, I have to pay them more. And so there has to be a level of give and flexibility to help people attract the specific types of people they need to do the work. And at the same time, we don't want everything to be an exception, because then we really don't have a pay structure anymore, and it becomes legally indefensible as to why we're paying people the way we're paying. When we have a structure, when we have policies, when we say this is a pay range, we can defend that in court. People feel like it's fair. People know how to work within it. But when everything's an exception, everybody's paying outside of that, it's no longer a pay structure. So we have to, HR has this difficult job, and this is one of the reasons why people complain about HR who aren't in HR and says that, oh, they make it so difficult, they make it so hard. because they are in this difficult position of trying to create a structure and hold people to accountable to staying within that structure, while also not being the police and saying you can't do what you need to do to get the work done. So their pay structure, establishing a pay structure, is not the end of the work by any means. In fact, it's the easy part. The hard part is actually monitoring and helping people out there in the business pay what they want to pay while staying within our structure. So that is pay structure. You have reached the end of this topic. In the next topic, we're going to talk about incentives and bonuses and merit pay and all the fun stuff regarding that. So stay tuned for our next module on incentives.